Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Lori. Before I get started on this video about the higher self, I wanted to just thank each and every one of you for being here with me on this channel. Subscribing, liking the videos, commenting on the videos, and sharing the videos. Our community is growing and I'm really excited about that. As I'm writing my book, there's more and more information coming in, and I'm so excited that I have this community to share the information with. If I didn't have you guys, I would be, it just wouldn't be the same for me in writing this book and getting all the information out. So I want to thank you all so much for being here with me and for allowing me to have a platform to share it. So thank you. Okay, this video is going to be fun. It's another kind of like another story that I told about the light workers and the Akashic records. So this information also came in through my book, and it is about a really foundational, fundamental way to look at the higher self, why we have a higher self, what the higher self is designed to do, and remembering that there are no mistakes. There is an absolute reason and design for the higher self. Just like there is a reason and a design for our arms and for our legs and for every organ that we have inside of our body, for our eyes, our mouth, our nose, everything, the way the physical body was formed and designed through our DNA was very specific. There's a reason for every single cell that we have, so that we can be designed and created physically the way we have, so that we can walk and interact physically in this third dimensional realm and in the fifth dimensional realm when we had a physicality. There is also an electrical aspect of us, an energetic aspect of us that we can't see, that was also designed at the exact same time that our DNA was designed. So not to get into who designed us and how the human was created, that'll be another video. But when these beings began to create a physical form to hold an energetic form, there were two creations being created. The physicality of bringing a light being into a physicality, a physical form to stand and breathe and move. So the physical aspect, the DNA, and then the electrical component, all the different aspects electrically that would hold the light in place. And we forget about that because we are in a third dimensional realm, and so all we see is physicality, all we see is density, all we see is what is physical. And we forget that there is another aspect of us, a huge part of us that is light and energy and frequency and consciousness that vibrates and that had to have been designed to be held in the physicality. And so they were calling it an electrical grid system, okay? Basically, it's the 7 energy centers that we have inside our physical form that is also the channel, that I call the channel, that holds light coming in and the light that we are. It also holds our higher self. This channel also allows for us to experience higher realms, higher dimensional frequencies. It allows us to connect to higher energies and frequencies. It's basically a freeway system, an energetic freeway system. And it was designed to be that way. It was designed to be an electrical current so that we could maintain energetically our beingness inside a physical form. So we all came from a consciousness, an energy, a vibration, a dimension, another form elsewhere, which I've talked about before, and volunteered to come into a physical form. Now, before we came into the physical form, this part of you knows this. There's an actual remembrance within your cellular structure that remembers this. You could only contain or hold within the physical form a percentage of the light that you held, your consciousness, 3 to 11%. I've spoken about this before, right? And so based on how much of the light you kind of wanted to bring in, you would bring that amount in. Let's just call it 6%, okay? Because the average human has about a 6% of their light which is the light of who they were prior to jumping in, and it's the light of who they still are, one aspect of them. This 6% of this consciousness moved into the physical form, into the etheric body, the subtle body, which is just a field. So the human calls it body, right? The subtle bodies, the energetic, the emotional, the mental, the etheric, the physical, they're fields basically. So it's an etheric field that is designed to hold this consciousness and vibration, this aspect of you inside, so that you can experience all of this. So that's an aspect of you. They also designed the higher self. The higher self has been designed as the bridge between your third dimensional physicality, the physical aspect of you, the part of you that was designed through the DNA, which is also the egoic structure. So the ego was designed, it's not designed by the DNA, but the ego is a structure that was put into place, not only in the third dimensional form, but in a fifth dimensional form. There was an ego, and it's just a structure that allows for safety. It's almost like it's an aspect of the human that allows them to feel safe in their world. There's nothing wrong with the ego. The ego was designed in a fifth dimensional field. So back thousands and thousands of years ago, when we were in a fifth dimensional vibration, living on a fifth dimensional Earth planet that was vibrating at 5D, there was an egoic structure. It was a little bit different than the egoic structure that we have right now. It didn't have the programming. It didn't have the intense paradigms that the ego holds so deeply. But it was designed to protect the being of light that is inside the physical form and the physical form itself. So the higher self, I'm not going off on the tangent on the ego, but the ego is a beautiful aspect of us. We don't ever want to get rid of the ego. We're integrating the ego into these higher states of consciousness that we're moving into. And we're allowing the ego to quiet down a little bit. We're allowing the ego to kind of take a time out, right? It's been working really hard. It's been working overtime most of our life, and it's done a great job, right? And so now the ego can kind of sit back and really kick its feet up and just relax a little bit, let the higher self take over. So the higher self is now the bridge between the physical part of us, the part of us that walks around every day, that is inundated with programming, that is inundated with belief systems, emotions, experiences, physical symptoms, right? Everything that we're experiencing on our everyday, in our everyday world, right? That's the physicality of us. And the higher self is here to bridge that physicality with the light being that we are inside of us that came in, that 6%. So you can imagine the higher self as a consciousness, an aspect of us that is vibrating higher than a third dimension, okay, but isn't holding that same consciousness as the aspect of us that came in. So I'm going to say that again. The higher self does not hold the same high frequency in consciousness as the aspect of us that came in. Okay? So let's just so that we can understand this. Let's say that we came in as a 20th dimensional consciousness, a 20-dimensional frequency. Okay? And we took about 6% of that and just moved it into the etheric body. And then because there was a higher self designed to move in and integrate in, the higher self is in between the dimension of a third dimension and this 20th dimension. Typically, it's probably very close to this aspect of us now. So more of like it kind of vibrates probably between a 4 and 5 dimensional frequency. If you were to try to put the higher self in some sort of dimensional speed, right? So it's very close to the third dimension, but it's not in the third dimension. It doesn't vibrate. That aspect of us doesn't vibrate in the third dimension, but it also doesn't vibrate in the 20th dimension. The whole purpose of the higher self is to realign and reconnect us to the 6% of this 20th dimensional aspect of us that is within the third dimensional form. So it's vibrating at a higher frequency than third dimension, much lower frequency than a 20th dimension. It is an aspect of us. Okay? So when we split from this consciousness and took 6% and moved it into the etheric body, an aspect of us, right here we are, an aspect of this moved into the higher self-consciousness, the consciousness that would reside as the higher self, which is what the human calls it, okay? Which is an aspect of us. It is a consciousness. It is an energy. It is a frequency, okay? That's how it is experienced and felt. That is what it's designed to be. So, 20th dimensional aspect of us, 6% moves into the etheric body. An aspect of us at that same time moves into the higher self-consciousness. You can almost imagine it as, almost like in another etheric body, but it's the higher self, okay? And it's designed to connect us in this dimensional field, the third dimension, with not only the light being that we are inside, held within that etheric body, but it's also designed to connect us to all of the guides that are around us. It's designed to connect us to the I am presence, that is an even higher vibrational frequency of us. It's designed to connect us to that God spark or source spark within us. It's designed to remind us of what we're doing down here. Because when we were designed, they understood, they being the beings that designed us. I'll tell you another story about that later. They knew that if there wasn't some sort of bridge between the third dimension and the being of light that we are, it would be almost impossible to begin to navigate this field and coming back to that light of who we are. We needed an aspect of us that was in a lower vibration than the light being inside of us, higher vibration in the third dimension, to guide us, to awaken us, to move us, to say, hey, don't forget, you need to go here. Hey, don't forget, you're designed to do this. Hey, don't forget, you actually love doing this, saying this, moving here, being with this partner, leaving this job, right? The higher self comes in and begins to navigate. It's a navigator. And so what's starting to happen is the ego has always been the navigator for us. The ego has been designed that way. The higher self has always been circulating within us. Always. Just like the light being the light being that we are, has always been inside our etheric body. Just like the spark of source that every single physical human has inside of them has always been inside of us. The higher self has always been circulating within us as an energetic consciousness and frequency. What's happened is, as we start shifting into higher states of consciousness, allowing ourselves to receive more light, allowing those denser consciousnesses to move out, including the emotional, the mental, the physical, allowing more space so that more light can come in. We start vibrating a little bit faster, vibrating a little bit more, aligning with a higher dimensional field. And the next thing you know, we start recognizing that we have this aspect of us that we call the higher self that is designed to move us into the next highest version of us, because that aspect of us knows exactly who we are. Because you see, we live in a third dimensional field and we have blinders on most of the time, and we forget. We forget that we dropped in. We forget how we dropped in. We forget that we took only a percentage of our light into this etheric form. We forget that we took an aspect of us and moved it into a higher self-consciousness for the sake of this time right now, shifting and moving us. There are so many things that we have forgotten that we are beginning to remember. And it's very simple. It makes it makes sense why we would have a higher self, why these beautiful beings that designed us allowed the higher self to come into existence so that we could be guided right now. And the higher self, because the higher self is not going to be able to guide us into these higher dimensional fields, because the higher self has been inundated with this third dimensional consciousness at such a speed and such a rate that it is basically conditioned and programmed. And through those conditions and programming that we have moved through from the time we came into the form until this now moment, the ego has created this structure and this way of being that protects us based on the paradigms and programming that we have walked through in every single one of our now moments in the past and experienced. So to shift the ego out of those paradigms is challenging. It's very, very hard. So what happens is we start to connect and remember that we have this other aspect of us, the higher self, which knows way more than we do, which was designed to hold a higher aspect of us, to remind us of what we're doing here, and to start to guide us. Now, I personally believe that the other thing, side note, the other thing that the higher self does is, like I said earlier, is it connects us to our galactic families. So if you're from a star system, right, or an angelic realm, or a planetary system, right, there is an energetic cord. It's not really a cord, but there is an energetic connection that you have to where you are from. And the higher self bridges that. The higher self says, hey, don't forget about this. You've got this cord here. You've got these beings. Hey, don't forget. You're connected to your I am presence. Hey, don't forget. You've got these gifts inside of you. Hey, don't forget. The light being that you are is still inside your etheric body. Let me show you. Hey, don't forget. You've got these amazing guides around you. Here, let me show you. Let me introduce you again. Let me remind you. Your higher self is taking you by the hand and reminding you, taking the blinders off, knocking on your shoulder, sort of like, shoving you, pushing you, gently, lovingly. It is a consciousness, it is an energy, it is a frequency, it is a vibration, it is you. Now, I personally believe that it is the hardest thing currently to do in our awakening process, is reconnecting and listening to the higher self. And the reason I think it's the most challenging thing right now is because it is an aspect of us. It's us. So for me, when I connect to, let's say, Mother Mary or Saint Germain or the Palladians, anything else that's sort of outside of me, even though those beings are a piece of me, right? So we're all one. I can move into that paradigm and say, sure, these beings are me, I am them. I get that whole paradigm. However, in my reality, they're outside of me. When I experience them, they're outside of me. When I communicate with them, they're outside of me. Okay? The higher self is in me, which makes it much more challenging and much more difficult to hear because it's subtle. It's quiet. It's a whisper. And what's happening as we start shifting into these higher states of consciousness is we start to hear it a little bit more. We start to hear it a little bit more, right? We've had the higher self in us since the moment we dropped into the physical form. When we dropped into the physical form, we were completely 100% aligned with the higher self, aligned with the light being within us, aligned with all the beings around us. That's why when you were very, very young, you saw a lot of beings. You probably saw angels and star beings and all these things, right? Because you were in a much more aligned state. What happens is, from day one, every single day that you are experiencing the third dimensional consciousness, every experience that you have in that third dimensional field creates a consciousness, an experience, emotionally, mentally, or physically, that moves into your subtle bodies and either processes through or stays inside them. And so that dense consciousness begins to shut down, close down, or kind of suffocate that alignment, that clarity, that remembrance, that knowingness, that pure light that you come in as and that you're aligned as begins to fade based on the type of consciousnesses or experiences you are having from the moment you dropped in as a baby, right? And so for many of us, we've had all these experiences. Some of us were more traumatic than others, and these experiences have created dense consciousness inside, which has basically dimmed the light, right? Hasn't gone away. Nothing's ever gone. We don't lose anything. We don't have to go find our higher self. We don't have to bring the higher self in. But the reason we do say that sometimes is because you're consciously reminding yourself that you have a higher self within you. But you don't have to. It's always there. And so when people talk about embodying and integrating the higher self, basically it's just conscious remembering of how this whole thing works. If you begin to understand, you guys, that you all have an energetic grid system inside of you, just like you have a physical system, right? We're so familiar with our physical system. We have an energetic grid inside of us that works so well. And the higher self is part of that energetic grid system. You can imagine that it's just floating around almost like a figure eight, going in and out, moving into all these different dimensional fields, and it's just always flowing. It's circulating through you. It's circulating. And there'll be times throughout our lives where we can remember like, oh, I remember I was so intuitively guided to do that. That was your higher self, right? We tapped into the higher self. What's happening now is that we're beginning to tap into the higher self more and more and more. And eventually, we will be integrated with the higher self so closely that it's a constant flow and interaction. So everything you're doing, you are being guided through the gentleness of the higher self. It's just a matter of learning what that feels like, learning what it looks like, learning that. What does it sound like, right? How do you do that? A lot of it is, when we say intuition, right? What's my intuition telling me? The intuition is just a term or a word that the human uses that allows them to tap into the feeling of their higher self. So your intuition, when you're like, I'm intuitively feeling this, it's just your higher self saying, hey, listen to this, right? The intuition that you have, your intuitiveness, is just you hearing your higher self. That's all it is. It's just you're tapping into the consciousness of your higher self speaking to you. So when we shift higher and higher into states of consciousness that are higher and higher, we begin, remember we're light, remember we're energy, remember we're beginning to move into more energy, hold more light, and remember the higher self is in us as light, vibrating at a higher consciousness. So the only thing that can happen is that we begin to connect more closely with this energy. Here's the higher self moving, coming in and out. Let's just say this is our third dimensional self, right? So here's the higher self coming in and out, coming in and out, coming in and out. And we're down here in this really dense third dimensional space. Every once in a while, we'll tap into that higher self, right? Oh, we'll feel it. So the higher self isn't moving, but what happens is we start shifting into higher and higher states of consciousness, just like this. And as we do, we start being able to experience, feel, hear, and live with the higher self more and more, right? And so we're getting more light, we're releasing more trauma, more pain, we're healing, right? We're doing all this amazing work, and as we're doing it, we're moving deeper and deeper into or integrating with the higher self. And then the next thing you know, you are living with your higher self. So how do you know, first of all, how do you know that you are living with your higher self? The higher self is the aspect of you that has no opinion or judgment. Higher self doesn't judge. The higher self doesn't live in duality. Remember, you guys, the higher self, this is an easy way to do it too. If you know energy, if you remember consciousness, remember energy, it's very simple. The higher self lives or resides in a higher consciousness. Okay? There's no duality in that consciousness that is the higher self. And there's no judgment. Remember, judgment and duality is a third and fourth dimensional experience. And the higher self resides in a higher consciousness. So if you are wondering if it's your higher self or your ego, is there judgment in it? Is there duality? What's duality? Duality is right or wrong. Duality is good or bad. Duality is yes or no. The higher self doesn't give you duality because it resides in a higher state of consciousness. The higher self just tells you what's next. The higher self's sole purpose is to move you into the next highest version of you, constantly integrating you deeper and deeper into the light of who you are, which is that light inside your etheric body. The 6% that you brought down. The higher self's sole purpose, the biggest reason that we have the higher self, is to bring us deeper and deeper and deeper into the remembrance and the alignment of who we actually are. And how they do that is by allowing us to take the next steps that are going to bring us into a higher vibrational consciousness. Whether that's leaving a job, whether that's starting a new job, whether that's leaving a relationship, whether that's starting a relationship, whether that's moving from where you are or staying where you are, whether that means that you need to do some sort of exercise regimen that your higher self is guiding you to do all of a sudden, meditative practice, whatever it may be. We don't need to understand what the higher self is asking. We just have to trust that it's taking us to the next version of us, bringing us closer and closer into alignment for the light of who we are, which also, you guys, is going to bring you into alignment with why you're on the earth plane. If there is an actual designed blueprint for you to play out purpose work, the higher self is going to bring you there by bringing you deeper and deeper into alignment with the light of who you are. The higher self, so the higher self doesn't have a yes, no, good, bad, none of that. The higher self doesn't judge anything. The higher self is very simple statements. So, and the higher self sounds like, because it is an aspect of you, because it circulates through you, the higher self sounds like your own voice. It's filtrated through your own physical system. So the higher self is going to sound like you. It's not like you're going to hear some abstract sort of, dragon-like voice that's going to come in from somewhere outside of you and be very distinct and very separate from you. That would be easy. The higher self is inside of you. It sounds like you. It feels like you. It looks like you because it is you, which is the problem that we have trying to connect. It is by far the hardest thing to do, I believe, in the awakening process. Because it is us. It's an aspect of us. And it's so gentle. So I'm doing a master class, February 22nd, 2-hour class, $29, where I go into depth about higher self and I bring us into a really powerful, potent, guided journey meditation, reconnecting us to the frequency and consciousness of our higher self, feeling it, hearing it, experiencing it, all of that. Because when I'm walking around in my everyday, I am not constantly trying to connect to my higher self. I know that my higher self is in me, just like you all know that the higher self is in you. It's circulating. It's an energy and a consciousness. So then it becomes a conscious effort or a conscious decision to know that, to remember that, and then to begin to communicate and speak to the higher self, telling the higher self what you want, telling the higher self what you're ready for next. And when you hear the voices, so what's going to start to happen as you begin to tell the higher self what you want, ask the higher self what you're ready for. What's going to happen is you're going to have the battle between the ego and the higher self. It's going to happen, and you're going to get real used to it. The battle between these two aspects of you, because the ego is still believing that it's in charge and that it needs to protect you. And the higher self is being called by you to come in and to guide and to lead more and more and more. And the ego says, well, I don't know if you can do that by yourself. You've never done this by yourself. You don't even know what the higher self is. You don't know if you can trust the higher self. You can't even see the higher self. What if that's not really the higher self voice? What if that's just some other random voice in your head that's telling you to do something? I don't think you should trust that. Just trust me. Come back to me. The ego is duality. The ego is you cannot do that, or you absolutely need to do that. The ego is that's not good for you. That's good for you. The ego is that the ego will say you can't do that because you don't have the money. The ego is that's a stupid idea. Anything with judgment is ego. The ego also will push you to do things, right? The higher self's not going to push you to do anything. The higher self's just going to come in and say you really that trip isn't good for you. All of a sudden you're going to feel like, what? And you're going to feel it like, oh my God, I'm not supposed to go on this trip. Just like that, boom. You've planned this trip. You're supposed to be going on this trip. And then 12 hours before the trip, all of a sudden, you hear and feel within you that you're not supposed to go on this trip. That's the higher self. I'm not supposed to go on this trip. Here's what the ego does. You bought the ticket. You paid for it. People are waiting for you. You have to go on this trip. You have to. It's the right thing to do. That's ego. Ego. Remember, judgment. Remember, duality, the right thing to do. Right? Is that higher self? No, the higher self just comes in and says, you don't need to go, you can't go on that trip. You're not going on that trip. You're not going on that trip. That's higher self. And then you feel into that and you're like, I don't feel like going on that trip. No right or wrong, no judgment, it just is. And then the ego starts to battle the higher self, which is the aspect of you that knows inside of you, that feels that strong feeling of, I don't want to go. That's the higher self. I don't want to go. How many times have we made plans and then the moment that we're supposed to go and do it, the higher self's like, you don't really want to do that. You don't feel like going. Why don't you go take a bath instead? And the ego says, no, I made plans. I have to go. I'm supposed to go. That's the right thing to do. If I don't go, then I look like this and this and this and this, right? The ego is going to tell you what's right or wrong. All of us, it's a feeling as well. It's a feeling. It's a feeling. And the more you can settle into and quiet yourself through meditation or through anything else, and start to listen to that soft, soft aspect of you. The higher self is soft. The higher self is love. You can imagine the higher self as an aspect of you that loves you and honors you so deeply, will never, ever steer you wrong, will never guide you in the wrong direction. Ever. Ever. I could go on and on about the higher self and the ego, and it's really hard to give concrete sort of step-by-step ways to really experience and hear the higher self because it's personal. It's like if I could move into you and say, okay, let's do a back and forth exercise. I want you to close your eyes, and you close your eyes. I want you to call in the higher self. Okay, I'm calling in the higher self. By the way, when you call in the higher self, the only reason why you call in the higher self is because you're consciously reminding yourself that the higher self is inside of you. I'm going to call the higher self in. Well, the higher self's already there, but that's just a conscious awareness of, oh yeah, the higher self is here. Bring the higher self in, and then we could have a dialogue back and forth. What are you hearing? What are you feeling? What are you experiencing? Ask a question. What do you hear? What do you feel? Higher self speaks through feeling because it's energy. I'll say that again. The higher self speaks through feeling because it is energy. And the more and more you can come back to this energetic grid that was designed perfectly, it may be a tad bit easier to begin to connect and align with the higher self. But it's a disservice, in my opinion. It's a disservice. I think we need to start to get real about higher self. It's like, come on, you guys. We don't even know like what the freak. I mean, we understand the higher self, but do you really understand why we have one? Do you understand the design of it and why it came in? Like really on a fundamental level, if you can start to understand fundamentally on an elementary level, basic foundational level, why the higher self was designed and how it was designed to work. Forget about the spiritual concepts of it. Forget about all that crap. Let's just get to the foundational basics of what a higher self is, which is an aspect of this consciousness and this consciousness is inside the etheric body. Boom. Okay, great. I got that. The higher self is an aspect of this consciousness, vibrating at a higher frequency than the third dimension, lower frequency than this 20th dimension, probably around the 6th or 7th dimensional frequency. Not quite sure unless we went into that consciousness and measured the higher self. I was not given the actual dimensional frequency of the higher self, but it is not in a third dimension and it's not in a 5th dimension, because in the 5th dimension, the higher self is still higher. Because the higher self is still designed even when you were in a 5D body. If any of you lived on the earth in the 5D, there was a higher self at that time as well. You were just constantly connected. You were completely aligned. So when you came in as a baby in the third dimension, completely aligned, right? So the energetic grid was on and activated and it was doing exactly what it was designed to do. That's what happens when you move into a 5th dimensional form, physical form. The electrical grid is on, you're activated, you're aligned, you're connected, you understand everything, you know you're not just this physical body, it all makes sense. And you are accessing your higher self at all times. You have complete access to the higher self. And the ego structure is there as a physical kind of structure, not physical meaning you could hold it, but as a part of the physicality of you experiencing the 5D to keep you safe. That's it, to make sure you're safe as you move about. But it's the higher self that is in complete alignment. So it's almost like the opposite of how we are experiencing third dimension, which is the ego's loud as heck and we can barely hear higher self. And in the 5D, the ego's really, really quiet, doesn't need to have a major role in our life, and the higher self is completely in control. Okay, it's really challenging, you guys, in a third dimensional field. Okay, remembering consciousness and how it vibrates. Remember consciousness and all of that and how energy works. To begin to remember the higher self, to begin to feel the higher self, to begin to hear the higher self, to begin to integrate and embody the higher self in a really potent way is challenging from a third dimensional field. That's why it becomes a little bit easier as we are shifting into these higher states of consciousness. It becomes easier and easier. And the other thing, you guys, is that it becomes natural. I say this a lot about ascension. You know, you can take all the classes, you can take all the courses, you can study as much as you want about all the tools and techniques to connect to the higher self. But really, allowing yourself to just move through the ascension process, which is shifting the light within you, you'll eventually, remember, this is what's happening, you'll eventually just begin to hear, feel, and integrate with your higher self. Now, are there tools that you can do? Sure. You can always consciously remember that you have a higher self. You can remember the energetic grid. You can remember what the higher self is in a very tangible way, as opposed to this spiritual kind of construct, right? Higher self, embody the higher self, connect to your higher self. You know, it's like, what the freak is the higher self? Can somebody just give me a little download of what the higher self is? Why do we have it? Why was it designed? It's not just there out of the blue. Oh, we just have a higher self. No, it's designed specifically to do something. It has a very specific purpose, and it's an aspect of us, right? So consciously remembering that, consciously bringing that in, consciously speaking to it. It's not a loud voice. It's not a loud voice. It's a very subtle, soft voice. So when you're starting to try to figure out, is this higher self or is this ego, right? Because remember, you guys, the higher self is always there. It's just going to get a little bit louder, meaning it's going to get a little bit, the softness is going to get louder. The ego is loud. The higher self is going to get a little bit, the softness of the higher self is going to get louder and louder. And then there's going to be the battle back and forth. Easiest way to decide if it's higher self or ego is ask yourself a couple things. One, ask yourself, is there duality in what this voice is saying? And if that's the case, then it's ego. Is there judgment in what this voice is saying? And does it allow me to feel expanded when I hear it and feel it, or does it make me feel contracted when I hear it and feel it? The other thing is the higher self is more of a feeling-based way of experiencing it because of the energy that it holds. The higher self is a very high frequency aspect of you, so it's going to feel more as opposed to hear more. And the ego is a structure that is denser, and so it's going to sound more, meaning you're going to hear the ego more and feel it less. You're going to feel the higher self more and hear it less. That makes sense. I can't believe it's 41 minutes. I feel like I could continue to talk for hours. I need to figure out how to have I just can talk for a very long time. So I'm going to stop this, but that's a really good way to start to decipher. Okay. And by the way, that back and forth voice is always going to be there for a while. The best way that I can tell you from my own experience, I'll give you an example really quickly. I was supposed to go on a trip on Friday morning to go visit a friend. And up until the day before, up until Thursday, I was excited. I really wanted to go. I was packing my bags. I was doing all this stuff. And Thursday afternoon comes and I have a conversation with this person on the phone, and I hang up the phone and I feel inside of me and I hear just this really subtle voice of, you're not going tomorrow. Again, no judgment, no duality, just is. And I said, what? And I sat with the feeling, I'm not going tomorrow. And then I sat with that. What did that feel like? Oh my God, I'm not going tomorrow. Now, I didn't go into, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? I didn't do that. I just sat with the feeling of what I was feeling, which was, oh my God, I'm not going tomorrow. And then I would be like, am I really not going tomorrow? And then I would sit with the feeling of that. No, I'm not going tomorrow. I would sit with that feeling, that consciousness. Yep, I'm not going. It was an absolute 100% knowingness. Now, did I understand completely why? No. Was there a part of me in the back of my knowingness of why? Yes, I knew why. In that moment, I wasn't going to go and explore the why, because exploring the why can bring you into a rabbit hole and try to convince you to go. Well, let me think. Hold on. Why do I not want to go? What is this saying about me? What is this teaching me? Well, maybe I'm supposed to move through something. Maybe I'm supposed to go because I need to process something. No. There doesn't need to be a why. It just is. And then I had to tell this person. And the more I sat with it, it was, I played into the ego. I was like, let me just play with the ego. And the ego's telling me, well, this person's going to be upset. That sounds like a flaky thing to do. You don't even really have a reason for not doing it. Maybe you'll have a really good time. Maybe you should just go anyways. Remember, the ego is right or wrong, good and bad, duality, and judgments. Okay? So here's my higher self trying to tell me all these reasons why I should be going. And all the higher self is saying is you're not going. And so I had to be honest and tell this person 12 hours before that I wasn't going. And I had to allow that person to have their emotions and their anger and frustration. And I had to trust and honor what my higher self was telling me. And sit with that. So it came in randomly out of nowhere. It came in as a feeling and a voice, this subtle voice that said, you're not going. And then I sat with that feeling for a little bit, trying to really feel it. What does it feel like? And it felt expansive, meaning that I could breathe. What does expansion feel like? It feels like you can breathe. It feels like you can relax. Expansion, right? Contraction feels tight, like you're suffocated, like there's something forcing you or pushing you or making you do something. Contraction is a have to. Contraction is a necessity. It's necessary. Contraction is a should. Expansion is free. Expansion has no barriers. Expansion just is. And I felt expanded. I felt I could breathe. I felt relaxed. So that's an example, one example of when the higher self comes in. Out of the blue, by the way. Higher self doesn't like plot things out and like tell you when it's coming, when the message is coming in. So a lot of you are starting to feel that and hear that over and over again. And so it becomes a practice. We're practicing, There were many times in the last couple of years where I wasn't ready to accept what my higher self was saying. So I would go on the trip anyway. And then I would have a time where I was like, I should have just listened. How many times have you done that? I should have just listened to what my higher self said and not gone on the trip. I've done that so many times. I should have just listened to myself. How many times have you said that? I should have just listened to myself, right? So we have to allow ourselves to go through the ego's charge, the ego in charge, and the ego convincing us that we should be doing it, even though our higher self is saying no. Because it's extremely hard at times to really allow your higher self to lead. Because look at what I had to do. I had to tell this person that was really excited to see me that I wasn't going. That's what's required sometimes when we listen to higher self, and it's not easy. And so there's many, many times throughout my life, and especially the last 3 years, where I wouldn't listen to the higher self because I wanted to make sure that I was liked, that I was doing the right thing, that I was in this constraints of what is societally, whatever that word is, in the realm of what is right and wrong in our society, in our culture. Right? These are the things you do. So there were many times where I didn't do what my higher self wanted because it wouldn't have been looked at as the right thing to do, or the correct thing, or you would have been looked down on, or how could you be so selfish, or why would you just jump and do that? You don't even have any money, or all these things, all these judgment, which is ego. And again, the ego's not bad. It's not a bad thing. It's just part of the field we live in. It's part of the matrix that we're in right now, that we're moving out of. Judgment. It's part of it. And people are going to have judgments around what you do. You're going to have judgments around what you do. But eventually, as you start practicing over and over again, listening to that voice and that feeling of, oh, I'm not going. And you start recognizing that when you feel that and hear that, you listen and you do it, because it's always, always there to serve you. It's always there to serve you. And again, taking you to the next highest version of you. Always. So connecting and listening and hearing the higher self isn't a straight-lined, textbook thing that you're going to do. It's an energy that is moving through you that you begin to learn to connect to. It's an energy that is moving through you, that is an aspect of you that you begin to learn to connect to. It's in every single one of you. You feel it, you hear it, you know it. You're just remembering and relearning that it's your higher self. That's what you're doing. You've all heard it. You've all felt it. You've all known it. You've all ignored it. And you've all listened to it. So it's not a matter of how do I hear my higher self? How do I learn how to connect to my higher self? You already have. You just don't realize that you have. So now it's time to recognize and realize that you have. And it's that feeling. It's that knowingness. It's that soft voice. That's what it is. There are no pills you can take that are going to open you up and align you straight into that. You're already aligned. Remember the electrical grid, that system, you're already aligned with the higher self. So just being conscious of that, and any exercises that you can do that will allow you to feel the higher self, the better. So the more you, because what you want to do is you want to connect to that energy, right? And the more you can connect to that energy, the more you can feel that energy. So on that note, I'm going to close. I am offering a 2-hour masterclass February 22nd at 11 a.m. for $29. It'll most likely go over 2 hours. I'm doing questions and answers at the end. I'm leading us through a really powerful, potent, energetic exercise. I call them energetic exercises because we connect to the energies. And so we will be connecting to the energy and consciousness of our higher self. We will I will lead us through listening, hearing. So it'll be very tangible. You're not just going to be listening to me speak. You're going to be actually closing your eyes and participating in this interaction with your higher self. And tons of questions and answers at the end about anything you need to know, or any questions that you have about this entire process of ascension, higher self, galactic guides, anything. It doesn't have to be just about the higher self. So again, the details are down below. The link to register is down below. Again, it's February 22nd, 11 a.m. Pacific. It'll be recorded, so you can get the recording if you can't go live. And I love you all so much. I don't know how we just spent 52 more minutes with each other, but we did. I'm going to do a video. My next video is going to be on the subtle bodies, and how that has impacted us. Why do we have subtle bodies? What are they designed for? And how they play in our healing and releasing and clearing out of the emotions and the beliefs, the thoughts, all of that. Because the subtle bodies have a role just like the higher self, right? Nothing's an accident. Nothing just sort of haphazardly is inside of us, just like the higher self. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it made some sense. Pass it on to anybody that you would feel would resonate with it. And thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate every single one of you for commenting, for liking, for sharing, for reaching out to me on email. I'm grateful, grateful, grateful for each of you. Thank you for being down here in your physical form, remembering that you're a being of light inside, and that you've got this beautiful higher self that is reconnecting to you, reminding you of who you are, where you're going, what you're doing. And I could go on for hours about the higher self, but we will stop there. I love you. I'll see you guys soon. Next video. Bye.